Hello and welcome to another episode of PerryPOD. This episode kicks off season 3 and I'm super excited to be here with Donna Kennedy. Donna was a Scotland Rugby International Rugby Union player from 1993 until 2010. She was the first Scottish rugby male or female player to reach 100 caps and still sits atop that list as the most capped Scottish international player. With 115 caps, Donna played 5 Rugby World Cups and was inducted into the Scotland Hall of Fame in 2018. Now a member of the Rugby Centurions and co-founder of Scottish Thistles. Keep listening to find out more about Donna's incredible story. Hi Donna, welcome to PerryPod. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting me, Martin. Pleasure to be on.
Everyone always says that. You've got to say that, haven't you, on a podcast?
Well, it's a pleasure. I don't get invited to many podcasts, so I'm absolutely delighted.
Well, you should get invited to more because you've had an absolute illustrious career. And with regards to that career, obviously, you've spent a lot of your life playing rugby. But one of the first questions I want to ask you is, what made you get into rugby? Why did you start rugby? It's such a male-dominated sport. Everyone thinks of these big brutes playing rugby and running into each other. Now, obviously, it's getting such a massive push in the female world, and rightfully so, because you're bloody good at it. So what made you start rugby?
Yeah, it sounds like this goes back to, well, I didn't actually start playing until I was 19. So I was late to the sport, and that shows my age, Martin. So... So when I was at school, really what was available sports-wise for us was for women really was hockey and athletics, and the boys played rugby, and that's just the way it was. So at that time, I was doing athletics, and as I said, I was playing hockey. I left school. I was always very sporty, and was part of an athletics club as well, Les Mahagon Lanark Athletics Club. We went to certain meets around Scotland. And then where I was brought up was a sort of very rural area. My home village was called Carnwath, but I went to school in Biggar, which is very, like a young farmer sort of community type area, and they did a lot of sport. So I get into my sport doing through that side of things, and we were doing things like tug of war. And then the rugby club wanted to start up a women's team, so they quite rightly approached us because we were the ones that were obviously, a cohort that they could get on board quite quickly, and that's how it happened. So I didn't start playing until I was 19. I was a bigger rugby club, and then it was in its infancy of the start of the Scottish women's rugby team, and then and that was in 1993. We played our first international against Ireland, and I'd only been playing for, I don't know, a year, something like that. That was picked up. So, but yeah, I think it was just that transition from being really sporty at school, and then the opportunity came along, and we were asked to help start up the women's team, and the rest was really history from there. I had no idea at that time what type of career I would have or anything. I hadn't played rugby. I knew about rugby because I'd watched rugby with my dad, but I hadn't picked up a rugby ball until then.
See, I love that because that's such a common story of how athletes get involved in sport. It's they had no intents or purposes of doing it. They just wanted to play, have fun, played everything. Like you said, like a lot of athletes do, played a bit of everything, and then just happened to fall into something that they loved and found a bit of natural ability. So I think that it's such a natural progression for athletes to go down that route. It's just first and foremost have fun with what you're doing, and then if you're lucky enough, you might find something that you're good at and you like. It's always a bonus. You said at that young age you were mostly involved in things like hockey at school and athletics, and especially in the UK up until very recently, I guess athletics were probably the most dominated female sport in terms of viewership and in terms of people who know who they are, the likes of your Jess Ennis and your Katrina Johnson-Thompson and Paula Radcliffe. We've had incredible female throughout history. That's a no-brainer. But were there any female role models in your life growing up that made you want to get involved in sport more?
From a rugby perspective, no. It was only male role models that I knew from a rugby perspective. So if you look at it from Zinzan Brook, New Zealand number 8, I thought he was an outstanding player. But that was sad that I had to look to a male to be the role model in the sport that, I then ended up, having a illustrious career in. Thankfully, that's not the case now. There are role models there for, young girls coming through. We're visible now with regards to some of the coverage that we're getting. But back in my day, there was just no female role models. So you had to look to other sports, or it was to the male side of the sport that you would look to. It's a sad situation, but let's say that that's not the case now, which is good.
Exactly, well, it was a sad situation, that females had very little role models to look up to. So does that fill you with a lot of pride, knowing obviously what you've done in your career and represented Scotland at 5 Rugby World Cups and most capped international female player for a long period of time in the world that was, so after seeing what you've done, it must fill you with so much pride seeing that these young women going out there and from all over the world, not just Scotland, obviously, but competing at the moment at the World Cup. This must give a lot of young girls and even women like yourself pride and hope that the world's getting more involved in female sport because, as I said earlier, it's bloody good.
I mean, you can look at certain sports. You'll have certain sports that don't get as much media coverage, and rugby has been like that in the past. But I think women's sport in general there's a recognition now that clearly, from an athletic point of view and a skill point of view, sports have got a brand in their own right. Because if you can take rugby for my own sport in comparison, of course, we've not got the same physical build as the men. The collisions are not going to be at the same rate as the men. But you know what? We still play the game in the same way. The men play it from a strategical point of view and a skill point of view. So there's no difference when it comes to that side of things. And I suppose when you're looking at other sports as well, tennis is another prime example. It's been probably the most pivotal sport that you would see that's always had the same sort of ratings as the men's sport, from a media perspective and media coverage, and obviously being on the television so that you can see the female role models that are playing through tennis. And that goes back to, I remember thinking now when you're asking me about female role models, I can say like Martina Navratilova, when you're thinking back, she was very prominent in my day when I was growing up as a youngster. So from a sporting perspective, she probably would be one of my idols. But not in the sport that I ended up choosing. But, when you think back to female athletes, she was probably the more iconic one that was on the screen at that time, visible to me as a young sports person at that time as well.
You've touched on the importance of having women on TV doing their thing, and now obviously we've had the great success of the Women's World Cup in football recently, doing absolutely fantastic in the Euros and things like that. And how pivotal is that to get young girls involved in sport? We're seeing all these record-breaking attendances for female sports recently. How much difference is that going to make in the future, and why is it so important that these things are getting published and that they are getting front page media attention?
It has to be visible, and we need a platform that allows that to happen, because young children need access, they need opportunity. If you look at your sport, for example, from a table tennis perspective, where could you look around in certain areas where you could go and play table tennis? If you aspire to be a world champion, opportunities need to be there for the youngsters. And I suppose if it's with that visibility of how the youngsters can get into the sport, but also then it's that participation level and the support that they get round about it as well. And then it's also with regards to the players who have been within the sport, giving back to the game that they've got so much out over the years. And I suppose that's where I am at my stage of my career, is being able to give back to how much I've got over the 17 years that I played internationally, but also about what I'm looking to do now with regards to giving back to Scottish women's rugby, because we set up an association called the Scottish Thistles. So that's our ex-international players, women players who've played for Scotland that want to give back to the game. And there's 3 key areas that we want to support in, and that's the past, present and future. And because us as a cohort of players, we need support for ourselves, but also help to support the present players. But most importantly, it's that future, the future of the game. We need to safeguard the future of our game, going forward, not just looking at 10 years out. What does it look like in 20, 30 years?
You touched on having that place to look and to see, people like yourself doing sport. You said it like me, for table tennis, it's almost non-existent in Scotland, but we're always trying to do better. And like you said, with the rugby, and it's that catch-22 of, to get people playing sport, you almost have to sit them down in front of a television or a screen to see sport. And then, it's nowadays, what it's like, trying to get people off of a screen is an absolute nightmare. But, it's as you touched on, it's making it accessible, making it that people can go and enjoy it, whether that's live sport, whether that's taster days. But I think most importantly now, what you're seeing, especially in recent times, there's been a lot of Scotland women rugby games held at Scotstoun. As a Glasgow Warriors fan myself, it's so accessible for me. I can go along and you get to watch the women play. It's fantastic. So I think, as you said, having that publicity, getting people looking at screens or looking at tabloids and saying, look, this is actually happening. These amazing things are happening. But B, can you get people to the events? Because ultimately that's what's going to inspire them. You know, what I love about rugby that you don't see as much in football is that fan and that human interaction post-game. You know, rugby players will stand there for 20, 30 minutes post-game down at a touchline, signing shirts, taking photos, high-fiving the kids. And I think that's why rugby fans are so passionate about the game. It's because they get to meet their heroes from day one, you know, and I think the fact that the women can do that as well and go down and meet all these young girls and say, right, well, why don't you play? Why don't you come along and you can do this too? And that's what's a real strong fighting force for rugby and for moving the women's game forward, is the fact that actually these young girls get to go and meet their heroes. They get to see them play, but then they get to go up and high-five them and take a picture with them, get an autograph. That would inspire me as a young kid to go and play. You know, if I've just watched someone run around for 80 minutes, smashing into someone else, go, that's really cool. And then they actually came and spoke to me after it. That's awesome.
It's great to see, because, you know, you're preparing for a game, and sometimes you're in that zone. But, you know, you want to then make sure that, you know, that you are that accessible, to make sure that you're a human at the end of the day. You know, you've got emotions and feelings, and someone wanting to speak to you and, you know, and get your autograph, you know, it's a great thing. Do you know what I mean? And I think when you see how they do interact now, it's fantastic. And after the match as well, you know, the girls came up, you know, they went round the pitch and stuff like that, and they were signing autographs. And yeah, as you say, you know, that's just an inspiring the future of the game. You know, it's who doesn't want to get on the pitch and pull on a blue jersey and
And I love that he touched on the human side of it and the emotion side of it, because obviously at the moment we've got the girls out in New Zealand representing Scotland at the World Cup. Heartbreaking loss to Wales. Last kick of the game. How do you pick yourself up as an athlete in that position? You know, as you said, it's the human side, it's the emotional side. It's not just a loss, literally, that couldn't have come at a worse time. You know, it's not as if they were trounced the whole game. It's the last kick, and then to pick yourself up and go again against Australia within a matter of days. How do you do that?
Well, the key thing is you have to. That's the first bit, and they know that, and you know that as an athlete as well. You have to deal with it. You can't dwell in it. You have to get on and get in hand with the next job. With Australia, there's all to play for. You know, because the World Cup, it's different to any Six Nations. It's a one-off game. A World Cup, upsets happen. You've got to expect that an upset will happen. They would have prepared for this eventuality if this happened. You know, during your prep, you'll be saying, right, this, obviously you would scenario base it and say, if this happened, then obviously we've got another opportunity here. So I'd be hoping that's how they're facing this game, and I'm sure that's how Brian's preparing the team going forward, because they can beat Australia, and Wales could beat Australia. So it's all to play for. But it's definitely doable. You have to believe it. No one takes the pitch. You know, you don't, as an athlete, take the pitch thinking you're going to lose. You know, there's no point. You always take the pitch thinking you're going to win.
Especially in knockout tournaments, anything can happen. Anything can happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and I love that you touched on that earlier on in the week. I was chatting to Xander Fagerson, for those that don't know, Scottish current tight head prop and plays for Glasgow Warriors, British and Irish Lion, and he said the same as you. He said, you know, the girls have got absolutely every chance. It's knockout rugby, but you only need to play well for 80 minutes. Get up for it, go again, try and smash the win, and then who knows what can happen. And I think that's the exciting thing about, you know, something as illustrious as a World Cup. You know, and you know that yourself. You played in five World Cups. That's tremendous.
Just means I'm old, Martin.
It just means you were good. That's what it means. It means you were good. So, touching on those 5 Rugby World Cups, what was the best one and why?
The one that really sticks out would be 2006 when we were in Canada. Personally, because I felt like I was absolutely the peak of my fitness, probably the best condition that I had been in. And at the time, the squad, we were a good, tight team. We were winning. You know, we felt, you know, we went up against New Zealand in that World Cup as well, and we gave them, you know, we really gave them a good run for the money. There was a right belief that we were going to win that game, and that for me was just a poignant moment, because I just felt like we were the pinnacle of where we were with our rugby within that team. But for me, I thought I was going to retire at that World Cup, so I wanted to give it my all. It was going to be my swan song. I was going to finish up in 95 caps and walk away. So for me, that's probably the one that does stand out. But then I can look to the 2010 World Cup where obviously I didn't retire, but I did for a bit and then came back. And then went on to play in the 2010, World Cup. That was memorable because it was a home World Cup and it was in England. So, being able to play in front of a home crowd as well. So, I mean, you could look at each one, Martin. You could pull out bits of them. All of them are memorable. I think for us, 2006, definitely. So I felt like that team, we were right at the peak of our performance.
I'm glad you touched on that semi-retirement. 95 caps is nothing to turn their nose up at. And for those that are listening on the audio only format, behind you at the moment, there's a special cap in a nice frame, and it's the Centurions cap that you've got behind you. So obviously, a Centurion means that you got over 100. So you said you didn't retire at 95. You went on for 115. Wow, just incredible. I mean, to this day, you're still Scotland's most capped international player. But to be part of that illustrious Centurions club, that's the elite of the elite. Getting to represent your country that many times. And what was that like? Obviously, receiving that cap, and how did it come about? It didn't. I mean, I'm assuming it didn't just turn up in the post one day.
Yeah, it was amazing. And the lead up to it was that I got a phone call from John Smith. So John Smith, South African captain. I had to check. I said, John Smith, as in South African rugby player. I was like, wasn't quite sure who it was I was actually speaking to. And he said, I want to come and have a chat to you about something. And then I just, I said, yeah, of course. And he came to my house, personally came to my house, and I had to pinch myself that I had John Smith sitting in my living room on my sofa, thinking, my goodness me. But yeah, he was very keen to get this off the ground. He was obviously looking to contact all players that got 100 caps, and he was very keen to make sure that the women's rugby players are involved in that. And why not? We've done exactly the same. We've got 100 caps for our country, so there should be no differentiation between whether you're male or female. And then it got to the point where we got everybody together, and there was a event down in London. I think it was in 2018, if I'm right. My memory serves me right, Martin. And it was in November, and I remember us all going down and get presented. It was with our jackets, so not necessarily the caps. Yeah. We all got our jackets with the Centurions on. It was just a massive event. I think I can't remember how many people were in the room, but it was just, a very memorable event. And to be there with other players who've achieved the same, over the years. So I think there's a stat that John told me it was about. I think there's only, I hope I get this right, I think it's either 2 or 3 in 1,000 out of international rugby players that will go on to gain 100 caps.
Wow. That's incredible. So you mean you really are part of such an elite group. And, I think obviously every athlete or every budding athlete has had moments in their career where they go, this is tough. Like, why am I doing this? Especially these days tend to come after the losses or the training sessions where you would have known out in the rain and the mud and it's cold and it's freezing and you don't want to be there.
Oh, never mind that. It was the snow.
The snow and these questions come in, but when you get to a milestone like that, you must just go, this is just all worth it. Absolutely worth it, and you should be rightfully proud of having such an amazing achievement, such as, being a Centurion. There's girls out there in New Zealand, we've touched on it earlier, earning caps for their country. And I would like to invite you at this moment, I'm going to put you on the spot, to give them a shout out of encouragement, give them some support, and make them know that the whole country is behind them.
I think first of all, I want to say there's a whole team effort behind this. So the management team, the medics, and everybody has got them to the place where they are just now. There's a big momentous moment for them, but they know what they need to do. I can send them all the good luck messages in the world. They know we are behind them, but for them, early tomorrow morning it is for us. I wish them just the best of luck. I want to go out there and just perform and concentrate on their own performance, and the results will come.
So earlier on, you touched upon the Scottish Thistles. The importance of the past, present, and future. I don't want to upset you here, but obviously, past will be your own game because your career has come to an end at the moment. The present is obviously we've got the incredible team out in New Zealand at the moment, fighting for World Cup glory, representing Scotland. And the future is what next? What's to come for Scottish international rugby, but also worldwide international female rugby. How can it be improved? And earlier this year in 2022, yourself and a few other ex-internationals, co-founded the Scottish Thistles. And, you briefly touched upon it earlier, but what is the importance of the Scottish Thistles, and why is it going to be pivotal moving the game forward in this country?
The importance is the fact there's a sense of belonging, because we've 220 of us, I think it has, that's donned the blue jersey and counting. That is something that's special, and we want to make sure that stays connected. And that's what was the key why we wanted to pull the Scottish Thistles together. So it's the association, it's the network, but it's also about the connection, the belonging. So that's the key foundation of it. And also from us as past players, I found it difficult when I retired, and there was no support there for me. I had to seek my own support. I went down a deep, dark hole, which I more than happy speak about, and I'm very open about it. With regards to, I lost identity. I didn't know who I was because I was always known as Donna, the rugby player. And that was tough. And I don't want anybody else to go through that. So we want to make sure that we've got that support there. There's also players that don't get a choice when they retire because they have to end their career through injury. So we also have past players that have experienced that can help support the current players. If that ever happens to them, then they've got that support network there for them. And also, if you look at the team at the moment, present team that went out to New Zealand, some of them never got on the plane. They would have been involved in that training squad. Who's looking after them? Again, that's where we could come in and help and support that. And we've had great backing through the SRU and Brian Eason and his team as well. We've reached out to him. He's absolutely ecstatic with what we've pulled together, because again, it's difficult, yourself as an athlete. You've got to deal with your own emotions, and your teammates are there for you. But sometimes it's not your teammates that you want. You need something separate away from that, because you don't feel part of it anymore because you've not been included. It's that exclusion part that makes you feel disconnected, and that's hard to deal with, really hard to deal with. And I feel that that's what we can help, because we've been through it, so we all understand. But then also looking to the future, people don't even know, like myself, when I started when I was 19, I didn't even know I was going to have a rugby career. How do we reach out to people who don't even think that they want a rugby career at the moment? There's a lot of transferable skills across all other sports. So it's looking at, is every school in Scotland, for example, got rugby on their curriculum? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, Martin. So maybe that's the sort of things that we need to look at. They spoke earlier about the accessibility, the opportunities, to play rugby. It doesn't always have to be contact, it's touch. There's other variations of the sport that can be played, 7s, 15s. There's other ways that you can get into the sport. And it's getting in early, I think, as well, to make sure that you've got that access. I don't want MD having the same experience as I had at 19. And yes, I had a great career. But goodness me, when I look at some of the young players now, what the setup's got, if they can pass a ball further than I could when I was playing, it's just the skill set is just phenomenal now. And we need to keep that going. And I think that's where, for me, that's where the future of the game has to be. But there's one big area at the moment that really needs addressed. And I've not got the answers to that in the moment, but it's the domestic game. It's the weekend, week out games that is happening within the Scottish setup. It's not at the same standard as it would be, for example, in England. And I will say this openly, I think you have to be playing a high standard week in and week out. And that's why you've got a lot of the players that are playing across the border, because the standard is high. And it happens in other sports. It's not just in rugby. And that might be okay, do you know what I mean? But then it's making sure that players are getting well looked after. And but then this is a challenge I've got, how do we then build that within the domestic game within Scotland? Because not everybody can travel. Not everybody's got that opportunity to go and play elsewhere. It has to be on their doorstep. I'll go back to that accessibility.
We've spoke about all throughout this chat is having it accessible, having it in front of you, making you available to watch it, available to play it, and that is the key step moving forward. But the $1 million question is, how do we make that happen? Thankfully, that's not a question that you or I have to answer today. I really want to touch on the fact that you spoke about feeling like you lost that identity. I've spoken to a lot of athletes, and that is such a scary reality that a lot of people don't think of, especially non-athletes or non-sports people, as they go, well, you just move on and get another job. And it's like, that's not the case. This is something you've devoted countless hours to, countless minutes playing and thinking about and devoting your life to it for years and years and years. And as you said, it's people go, oh, it's Donna the rugby player, oh, it's Martin the table tennis player. And that's what you feel defines you. You know, I often get asked, what do you plan on doing after table tennis? And I'm like, please don't ask me that, because I have no idea. I don't want to think about that. You know, and as you said, it's been able to sit down with that shared collective, such as the Scottish Thistles, and having conversations, knowing that you're going to be okay, knowing that you're in a safe environment, that you can share your thoughts, feelings, fears, expectations for what's to come, and to have that support group, as it were, you know, within the Scottish Thistles, being able to talk to someone is massive. You know, you said you went down into a dark place yourself. Had you had something like the Scottish Thistles there at the time, it could have been a completely different story for yourself, because who are we without our sport? You know, and sometimes that's incredibly difficult to define, you know. So I think that's such a massive stepping stone for women in rugby in particular to move forward and know that actually, you know what, there is people there that are going to support you, that are going to help you. And ultimately, there's never going to be any judgment, is there, with Scottish Thistles? It's always going to be just love, help, and support.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's regardless of the sport, if you played at a certain level and then suddenly you're not in that environment anymore, because there's a lot of structure that comes with it as well. You've got your training, you just know what your daily routine is going to be. And then suddenly it's not there anymore. It's like it's there and then it's not. And I think, as we know, if we're reaching the end of our career, there's that level of acceptance that what are we going to do? So we need to start thinking and preparing a wee bit early. And it's not a palatable thought for a lot of us, because we don't want to have that happen to us, but we're all about preparation. So it's like, well, why aren't we preparing ourselves when we get a certain part of our career to know that this is going to happen to us? And then when it does happen, we might be in a better position to deal with it as well. And then we've got that support there that can help people deal with it, because we all deal with it in different ways. And
Yeah.
mine was just complete denial. I just wanted to stay part of the game, launched myself into coaching. I suppose I went through a really harsh learning curve with coaching, because I just expected everybody to play and train the way that I did. And I sort of enforced myself as a coach in the way that I played. Big mistake. I know that now. Huge mistake. And I suppose that's where my big learning curve came about. It's not about you anymore, Donna. It's just not. It's about other people. It's about the people you're coaching. So these are the things you learn after, but at the time you don't realize it. And these are the short stories that we can share to help people make that transition out of being that elite athlete and in that environment to then, what's the next chapter? What does that look like?
We can end on that fantastic message. And I just want to say thank you, Donna, for coming on PerryPOD.
Welcome. Thanks for having me.
Season 3 of PerryPOD is back. Thank you so much, Donna, for your amazing conversation there about being involved as a young woman in sport and moving forward through your illustrious career, and what that can mean for the support of women's rugby in this country with the Scottish Thistles. I can't wait to share more episodes of PerryPOD with you all in the coming weeks. Look out for them. Make sure you watch, listen, subscribe, like, share it, do whatever you want. Just as long as you pay attention, I don't care. Have a great day. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching.